Hey, it's been a minute. Well, 2 years. It turns out I don't gotta go fast. When I set out on this project, it was meant to be every game in the series in one video. But I could never figure out a gimmick I was happy with for all of them. So I decided to just cover the classic games to buy myself some time. Yeah. See, the problem is, I still haven't figured out what to do with the modern era games, but I spend my life aspiring to the Sonic 1 box art and coming up shorter than the later games in this epoch of schlock. What can I say? A ton of other projects took longer than I wanted, some still haven't come out, and basically everything went wrong. Which you'd think would help with a project like this, but no. 2 Sonic wrongs have not made a Sonic right. Especially because the first thing that went wrong was I realized I'd used up all of my best ideas for the first video and was worried about how to go forward. I guess we could say I had a rough transition to 3D, but then again I used up my very best idea on the first game and hey, didn't stop me from the rest of that video. Plus, as I said, Sonic shows us that going downhill can lead to dizzying highs. So, I should just believe we're going somewhere good. Welcome back to Playing Sonic in Wrong or Weird Ways to Contrive Discussion, Adventure Edition. Today we're moving into what Generations dubs the Dreamcast era of the franchise. You could scoff at them tossing Heroes into that mega collection, but Wikipedia says the Dreamcast shares Heroes console generation, so it's part of this Sonic generation too. Congratulations GameCube, you didn't even make bronze. To do as Sonic does and cut to the quick, I love this game and probably a pretty absurd list, alongside stuff like Postal 2, Sonic Adventure stands strong. My reasons for loving it have changed over time. As a kid, it was the coolest game I ever played, an absolute thrill ride with seemingly never-ending stuff. As an adult, there are 2 reasons. One is this is as close as they ever got to the spark of 2D Sonic in 3D. These stages are playgrounds, and Sonic's incredible mobility means you really get to play on and off these grounds. That's a big part of the thrill to me, seeing these intricate, laid-out challenges and occasionally just being able to say no. These stages aren't perfectly made as traditional platformer fare, but that makes them a perfect fit for our unconventional protagonist, a cocky free spirit who possesses an absurd speed. Why would he play by the genre's rules? Sometimes it's as simple as ignoring a handful of platforms, and sometimes it's circumventing entire segments in a single bound. Speed isn't just a gimmick of the character, it's expressed through the design. This is what 3D's made for. 3 dimensions of freedom, baby. It also makes these stages more believable, like I'm truly trekking through Sonic's world as he would. It's just one with surreal sky-high highways and serene flying islands, excitement and mystery around every corner. Then you get into Eggman's bases, which are much more purpose-built to keep Sonic at bay, where he'd much rather be to begin with. To this day when I'm playing games, I'm always trying to climb atop the scenery. This game left me with an unbreakable habit, and less helpfully, a feeling of being constrained when a game doesn't have a jump button. Even if this game were just Sonic, I wouldn't call these spaces wasted. But there are 5 playable characters besides. Tails is about being even more busted than the Blue Blur, which is a gut buster. His whole story is about looking up to his big bro, meanwhile his gameplay is all about looking down on him. Fastest thing alive, Sonic the Hedgehog. I'm calling hogwash because Tails is taking him to the cleaners. Meanwhile, Knuckles is just chill. This game is a great example of asset reuse done well. Each character experiences these same spaces differently, which makes both the place and the player feel more distinct. Sonic's speed feels so much more impressive when playing as Amy, for instance, and the fact I've been through here in linear fashion makes Knuckles' exploration much more intriguing. It's like before now, these places were unknown from me. The Emerald Hunt gameplay, which is the kind of thing I would usually hate, I don't here because it's quick, breezy, moving is a joy, and it sets Knuckles apart from everyone else. I can't say I have a ton of fun with Gamma, Amy, or Big, but looking at this game as a whole package, I can never say I begrudge them being here. And you know why? Well, reason 2, besides Gamma having one of the best little stories in the series, the Shinada of Sonic, it's in the title, man. This game is an adventure. You have 6 playable characters with their own perspectives, and with them a tornado of new features to reel you in and make sure you're never bored. Later games will be greater in scope, higher in stakes, but none feel larger in scale thanks to how many pieces are playing their part. I don't like everything this game has to offer, but as a whole, it's so grand. And nothing takes up too much time. Except for this absolute dog water. It's this breadth of level designs, gameplay quirks, and weird one-off activities keeping you on your toes, and I get to look back at the tail end of it and feel like I've done so much. As I enjoy Sonic 1 the most amongst the 2D games because it feels like a developmental journey of discovery, I'm really into Adventure for similar reasons. It's experimental and all over the place, and that's the essence of a great adventure. I also love the tone of the story. An ancient mystery with some darker elements, building on the past game's imagery with little nods while never treading on the present, which is a spirited tale mostly focused on character growth. Sonic and, well, Big are static characters, one more than the other in one form or another. They're self-assured and mostly undaunted. Other, less certain characters, through their interactions with and in response to them, come to introspect and grow, coming closer to who they want to be. Okay, they really only do that in response to Sonic and in Gamma's chassis, Amy. No one really grows in response to Big, but then there's no emulating how good he's got it. The delivery of these stories is stodgy and awkward, and Sonic even having a plot which takes itself in any way seriously is going to be a point of contention moving forward. S3 and K's narrative had the benefit of being purely visual. You introduce voices into the soon-to-be awful sound mix and you're gonna lose some people. While Sonic 1 was my first ever game, I consider the adventure era my most invested point in the series. I was the right age for it to make its strongest impression, and so I'm always going to feel Sonic is at its best when it's going for a shonen tone. Besides that, I'm the kind who likes having a story, even if it's just there for a sense of motivation and direction. I can get invested in anything if I'm in the right mood, and this game puts me in a good one. While you do have to rewatch cutscenes when plotlines intersect, the tone of the dialogue changes depending on the perspective character, letting you see how they interpreted events, which is an interesting bit of characterization and a technique we don't see all too often in games. It's a bit more advanced than Sonic Rush. This is Sonic Rashomon. And on my replays multiple for this video because I kept failing to actually get writing going, my opinion has remained more stable than this game. I still love Sonic Adventure. I hope it never runs out of steam for me. That said, when it's running on Steam, well, it's not a different story for me actually, I still love it. But this is the first thing that truly went wrong with this video. I haven't even been hiding it from you. I've been talking about the not-so-esteemed Steam port, and people immediately guessed this would be the gimmick. I mean, who can blame them? This is a port of a fully 3D game where you can only move in 8 directions, but people calling it ate away at me a whole lot more. I don't know why, but some part of me wanted all of this to be a surprise. The stupidest part of my reaction? The fact people called it helps my case. It's first-hand proof people see this as the wrong way to play adventure. It even downright bolsters the point I'm intending to make, which is that Sonic Adventure's lasting legacy has been dirtied by Director's Cut. Sonic 3D Blast DC had me asking if a game is ever truly done. DX has me asking if a game can be undone. There's a few angles to consider here, more than you're able to move in at the very least. Preservation is the big one. The game has been kept alive long past its original hardware, but in an unideal state. There is a whole website set up to catalogue every way in which Adventure is degraded with each and every re-release, and it makes for an extensive read. Just like how I see Sonic Adventure as this grand game greater than the sum of its many parts, the ports are a boatload of seemingly small issues compounding on top of one another, leading to an experience which some would call utterly ruinous. Now, I myself wouldn't go that far, but let's break it down. Textures have been changed out, transparencies have been buggered, this lighting isn't baked, it's bloody cooked. Models have been updated, and while technically of a higher fidelity, they're arguably less of a fit for the game they're in. Now, Sonic loves chili dogs, but nobody loves his hot dog feet. And sure, the game gets boosted to 60 FPS, which sounds like a clear upgrade, but as I said, transparencies are buggered. A good number of visual effects had to be sacrificed to hit that 60, and it doesn't even do it consistently. On top of that, it does make the game overall glitchier, which does compound upon another problem people have with this game. It's one where you have to know when, why, and how to move to not die. 3D Sonic is kinda like jazz. It's about knowing when not to touch the sticks. Granted, the guy in this footage should never touch the sticks. With all this in mind, does this count as preservation? Is this a Ship of Theseus situation? I'm not smart enough to know. The console games of this generation have a spotty record in general when it comes to re-releases. This is because their hardware was specialized, leading to techniques which don't update cleanly. Newer tech may be more powerful, but just like a chainsaw isn't better for surgery than a scalpel, power can't always make up for something that's purpose-built. This is why a lot of updates either lose a lot of fine details and key aspects of an art style, run poorly, or in a worst-case scenario, both. For the most infamous incident of this phenomenon post-2000, look at the HD ports of the Silent Hill games. The PS2 just did transparencies a certain way that's incredibly difficult to replicate. There's a silver lining at least, and it's, man, I'm so glad Dante can't see this. Unfaithful, lacking, and downright bad ports are nothing new. They've been part of gaming since the Atari days. At one point, arcade parity was a selling point for a reason. I'm actually kind of nostalgic for cross-generation ports being incredibly different for better and worse, but let's put that aside for another adventure. A majority of companies don't care about preservation, only profit and prestige. The first a lot more than the second, and they only really care about the latter where it can bolster the former. Ports and remasters play to both, but old games don't sell as much nor for as much, so barring the crop of full-on remakes we've been seeing, which is a whole other kettle of fish, they're often done with minimum expenditure in mind, just enough so they can say they've earned an updated price tag. And so re-releases have been incredibly hit and miss. The PS3 era was filled with compilation re-releases. You bundle a whole series and give it a teensy touch-up, and whether they ran well was a roll of the dice. There are more games than you know out there that to play in their ideal state requires original hardware, which is impractical and increasingly expensive. Full disclosure, I am far from an expert in preservation. I'm a bodger who is happy settling for not even good enough if my enjoyment of SADX is anything to go by. And there are people far more informed on this than me who've made better videos than I can on the trials and tribulations of port jobs and preservation. What interests me here is the more abstract matter of a game's lasting legacy and the unfortunate position of Sonic Adventure. When I say Silent Hill 2 and 3 HD are the most famous examples of a bad 21st century port job, that fame literally and figuratively saved the game's image. The original titles came out on the wildly successful PlayStation 2 and had a die-hard fanbase who not only knew how it was supposed to look, but how important those visuals were, and could make sure those games were remembered as they ought to be. They're still doing it today. The original Sonic Adventure has by and large sold worse than DX's various re-releases, restricted by a console with a smaller install base as well as being part of a series that has a fandom that, while perhaps as ravenous as Silent Hills, if not the monsters that inhabit the town, are maybe a bit less preoccupied with atmosphere, considering they're, meant to be children. The series having far less prestige than a horror classic also meant it was never going to get as much well-meaning scrutiny, which is going to become a running theme with Sonic, one that's a lot less joyous than the invincibility music. This is what people see when they think Sonic Adventure, as people who didn't play the original had no point of comparison and had no reason to think it wasn't always like this. I have been similarly tricked. Just a year or two ago I played Black for the first time, emulated of course. At this point PCSX2 had a limitation where in certain games skyboxes wouldn't render, rendering the skies of black. I assumed the entire game took place at night. Turns out, I was just in the dark. Sonic Adventure DX is kind of like that writ large. It's wrong in all these ways which seem right if you don't know any better. After all, it's an early 3D Sonic game often cited as jank. None of us are immune from our presumptions. And to state the obvious, yes, some weren't going to enjoy it regardless. Bad taste is a fact of life, you know? Some will trot out the tired line that games age and leave a bad taste in my mouth. And you know, some of us are just tragically Aaron Hansen, unworthy of the first third of our username, but still thinking we got a handle on things. God bless the confidence. I feel I've gone a bit off course here. The crux of what I'm saying is, it's a shame when a platformer can't put its best foot forward. As its best looking, most stable version also happens to be the least recognised. And it's the bloody original. It's like if Twin Snakes overrode the original Metal Gear Solid.
I forgot. Damn.
I'll give the younger people a second to Google that one. That's a title condemned to eternal darkness that's all too human to forget ever happened. And well, this remake among many others illustrate further problems ports can pose beyond just better graphics breaking graphics. To return to Silent Hill, just as much as the updated graphics caused a stir, the updated acting illustrates a much broader point. The new acting is, in the abstract, more professional and consistent. A developer or publisher may see this as an absolute improvement, but that's thinking far too clinically. The issue is that Silent Hill 2's original, somewhat stilted acting massively enhances its mood, which is an important quality for a horror title. This is part of the problem with updated ports. They don't always remember the intent of the original, or else treat the happy accidents that wound up to the game's benefit as things that still need repair. The Twin Snakes looks more graphically impressive, but the lighting is flatter and the bass is cleaner, losing some interesting visual grit. The new direction for the cutscenes is a lot more lively and dynamic, but it's over the top to the point of parody and winds up harming the game's tone. The growing health bar is gone, which makes the early game less punishing for newbies, but it detracts from both the tension and sense of progression. The gameplay no longer illustrates Snake getting back into the swing of things after being out of action for so long. On top of this, many Metal Gear Solid 2 mechanics have been ported back without changing the encounter design to compensate. Some bosses in particular are more or less neutered, as obviously they were never made with these abilities in mind. This is a very common occurrence with ports and part of my issue with calling things dated. Additions aren't inherently additive. They may not slot in with what was already there. And as well as that, subtractions and changes are not necessarily cutting the chaff. What seems a smoother experience may just be one with memorable grit removed. There are so many ways a port can change how the original is viewed, and funnily enough, between the release of Playing Classic Wrong and now, a similar thing failed to happen with the Sonic Origins collection. Yet another compilation of Sonic's 1, 2, 3 and CD, with a lot of new bells and whistles bogged down by a litany of new bugs and hitches. This release is far from regarded as the best way to experience the games in question. The difference here is these older titles are well known and established enough that people understand this isn't how they always were. What I find so fascinating about Origins is that while it did get dragged, its failure was nowhere near as bad as it could have been, and what saved it wasn't a positive but yet another mark against it. The fact that it's entirely redundant. Better methods of playing the games this pack contains have long existed and are readily available, except for a really interesting one. What may be or at one point were the best official versions of these titles are actually in a similar state of obscurity to the original adventure. The Sonic Jam Collections features genuine purpose-built ports of the original quadrilogy. It has a save system, revamped stage layouts with multiple difficulty modes, and gameplay renovations like the spin dash in Sonic 1. This isn't a massive do-over, but these are otherwise better, fuller versions of the original games. They do come with a pretty big caveat of sound compression, and the collection as a whole has a pretty big weight around its ankle. This bugger came out on the Sega Saturn, a console that, lacking its own Sonic game and marketing, to put it lightly, wasn't running rings around the competition. Outside of Japan anyway, where they don't give much of a flip about Sonic. Something this collection was intended to solve with its info-heavy museum feature. Here we see the inverse of Adventure, improved re-releases forgotten by time. But hey, if they kept porting these imperfectly sound versions of the game, they could fix the sound problems and that'd be sound. So what does Sega do when it comes time to release more compilations, which for a good few years appeared to be every other week? Well, they blast right past Jam and go for Mega Drive ROMs, emulated with varying degrees of success until those were superannuated by retro engine ports. It may be Jam, but that doesn't mean it's preserved. When I was younger, it was easier to imagine that a game being re-released meant it would be improved. In terms of tech specs and raw graphical fidelity, it often is, but these polys can't count for much if the game has been rendered worse in just about every other way. Now to be clear, I do think at least part of the reason Saturn saw genuine ports instead of emulation was a power concern, but the work put in shows a whole lot of love. Or perhaps game companies hadn't gotten as comfortable with re-releases as they are today and felt they had to earn it. Plus, making a game wasn't as complicated a nightmare as it is now, most likely. We're in a weird period of either dodgy direct remasters or utterly overhauled remakes. Or whatever The Last of Us is doing. I am so curious to see what the last of Us re-release will be. At least Street Fighter put in turbo and new characters, something The Last of Us Part 2 Turbo Joel's Soul Edition could have done with. Anyway, how's all that for a bizarre lineage of porting? It's absurd that even these older games suffer from the same problem as Adventure in a much less damaging, though weirder way. They're more ideal versions overlooked by time. History is rarely what we think, just what we remember. It's even more fitting because Jam features the Sonic World tech demo, which is a bit of a first look at what would evolve into Adventure. Turns out, this package was documenting the future too. To go back to the Blast section once more, I was questioning if there could be a right and wrong way and method to cover a game. Can a review be antiquated? But I also mentioned that someone may go for the form of a game they'd expect most people to experience, and despite all that I've said here, doesn't that make a certain amount of sense? While there is unfairness, as DX is the worst version, it isn't exactly wrong to cover Sonic Adventure this way, because it is one that Sega put out and kept putting out, worse and worse. Yes, the original is better, but that doesn't make criticism invalid. Poorly researched or maliciously framed, maybe. Off-base edition, but far from off-base. Though for me, honestly, I'm cool with Adventure DX. Just like my nostalgia is tainted with Sonic 1, I played the hell out of DX and Battle as a kid. In fact, I never beat SA1 or 2 on their native console, only getting around to it when I was a little older and more patient. I'm not entirely sure where I fell off on Adventure 1, though I have a sinking suspicion. Meanwhile on 2, I know exactly where I was stopped dead. I never found the Rebreather on Dreamcast. Hope Big was nearby to fish him out. It's only years later seeing side-by-side comparisons I realised just how much had changed. Low standards and not being the most attentive sort does have its ups and downs. It means I get to enjoy a few things a little easier. I've never been particularly YouTube critic mode, look for a jaggy and get snagged on it, which doesn't always help with the job I've chanced into. I almost feel like this one was too easy for me because even if this is Sonic Adventure in its worst form, it's still a game that I just love. In case you think I'm wearing nostalgia goggles, please bear in mind, I replayed these games for this video, and if I had those lenses on, they'd have been cracked by what's to come. One last note, while it's still not perfect preservation, you can mod SADX extensively, fixing bugs and going some way to restoring the Dreamcast look. We can argue whether if someone complains about a re-release not being true to the original but being fine with improvements beyond it is hypocritical, but I've got my own cognitive dissonance to try and wrangle into a coherent video without introducing another straw man on top of it. The long and short is, I love this game, and this scuffed version doesn't diminish that for me. I can have it better, but I also don't need it. One day I might bother to take the 10 minutes to grab better SADX, but I'm a little lazy and like Sonic, now I'm here, I gotta go fast. The weird beauty of Sonic Adventure DX for the Windows PC in its current state is that it can represent two sides of preservation. It's at once a shoddy official port job and a fan's dream work. And with that, let's pivot to a fever dream. Man, that intro's fire, and it's only fitting because we're getting into what is the most hotly contested game in the series. And that's as far as I got before the problem started here. I didn't have a shadow of a doubt writing that, but it turns out I may have just as many memory problems as the Hog himself. Luckily, a smarter part of me decided to stop and double check my assumptions. I asked around, made a Twitter thread to gather as many thoughts as would be offered, and just over half a day later tallied the responses as best I could. My favourite part were the other people just as confident as I was. SA1 without a doubt, says Professor Segaface. Oh, I'm sorry, Prof, but I'm gonna have to ask you to hand in your doctorate in Sega Studies because there is nothing but doubt here. I do happen to have an A-level in A-Science, so I suppose that makes this poll scientific, even if there's absolutely no way to objectively interpret this data. I mean, it's me asking for people's perceptions of what games are most hotly argued about. For one thing, I know I'd get different results if I said divisive or controversial, but even beyond that, the responses are highly individual, each heavily dependent on so many circumstantial factors for each person. Which game do you care about the most? Find most interesting? Which came out most recently? Then you have fans of less liked games getting more heat than others and more often feeling made to argue their case. All of these factors will skew which discussions you most often come across, or which will stick in your memory the most. Not to mention what arguments you get exposed to online nowadays is basically a slot machine, and there is many a modern gambling addict. I'll admit to being one of them. This video really is just me turning my pathetic addiction into productivity. I forgot, and you can't record a whole war through one soldier's eyes, especially one with multiple fronts. While Sonic Adventure 1 is a greater technical leap, I would argue this is the real. Adventure 2 is a reinvention for a new age, offering a new to this day. While I did just dodge making a bold yet incorrect claim because I stopped to check, I'm just gonna blunder into this one, both by itself and because of how the series changed in the wake of it. And well, one reason this could be on my mind is that on this revisit, it happened to me. My opinion has wobbled. When I played Sonic Adventure 2 as a kid, I loved it. It's so in your face. It comes out swinging and lands that first hit with maximum intensity. It's why so many videos about SA2 begin by extolling how great City Escape is and then record scratch everything else. And it's not like City Escape doesn't hit the ground running, or scraping as the case may be. It's a strong, immediate showcase of this new design. So much faster and more focused, overcomes specific roadblocks rather than creative interpretation of a simplistic but flexible moveset. If you told me Unleashed followed this, and the thing is I can't knock Sonic Team for going this route. It sounds downright fundamental that last time, the 3D physics know-how just wasn't there yet, even instead of being semi-agnostic to them, with far less room for outright skipping. Replayability is still a factor, but rather than multiple victory. Over the years I've seen many videos taking issue with being graded, not liking that it tells you that there is a correct way to play. What this criticism from the very first title, Sonic has tested our times and rung up our rings. I could even argue these earlier scoreboards were more meaningful, as they rewarded exemplary play with 1-ups and continues, which would have had a long-term impact on play if the kinds of people who could get said bonuses would ever need them. Unlike...
I gotta do better next time.
This is a tiny change which to some has a massive psychological impact. I find this really interesting. We're programmed from an early age to ascribe a ton of weight to grades, that good marks in school will set us for life, and more importantly, a game we like getting a 10 out of 10 means our opinion is objectively correct. Though this feels like it comes at the cost. Personally, I feel lucky that I have a take or leave mentality to these marks. If the game appeals to me a certain way, getting good grades is a fun extra. If not, I don't really... Despite not caring to pursue them here, I think the ranking say has a rhythm for willing players to get stuck into and a much more easily readable goal to strive towards. And with so much more control over how the player will have to negotiate stages, it's easier to leave a strong impression. And that's the divide between preferring SA1 or 2 to me. Do you like stuff that's open, interpretive and sprawling, or something that directly challenges and rewards mastery? I've been on both sides. When I was a kid, this absolutely did. Even levels in the earlier title I'm not as hot on have a malleable appeal in their navigation. Meanwhile, an SA2 stage I don't. And these do feel like obstacle courses, losing a lot of that naturalistic vibe. This, along with the removal of hub worlds and minigames, take away from this feeling like an adventure. Though again, I don't believe this was a faultless trait in pacing, fitting the needs of its own structure. And all of this creates a question I'm left asking. Plenty of later entries are going to build on this outside of the adventure name. Is it this style of controlling characters around the stage, the middle ground between classic and boost? Well, besides these two titles already being radically different, it's still pretty much present in Heroes, Shadow, and 06. When you take the Advanced series into each and every title. And speaking of reinvention, I can't say other characters get to fly in the freedom either. The other two modes of play are expanded versions of Knuckles and Gamma's campaigns. The treasure hunting loses so much of its appeal through bespoke stages and radar changes. People often cite Pumpkin Hill as the best level, and putting aside its music, I think it's because design-wise it's closest to what was good about his SA1 levels. It's big, it's open, it feels like you're exploring a side of Skyrail Shadow shot by. It draws out everything that's enjoyable about playing Knuckles, which marks it out as an exception. The other hunting stages feature circuitous navigation and occasionally cramped layouts, both of which kneecap Knuckles' novelty of flight and climbing. This is exacerbated as the layouts are often made up of distinct zones, or worse, rooms, with only one means to navigate between them. This design is further hindered by the radar change. Now one piece at a time, it's unlikely you'll chance on a second or third objective on the way to the first. This does the roundabout job of making a free-roaming stage linear. It makes each revisit more and more fatiguing, as I don't feel like I'm on a fun Easter egg hunt, but methodically checking each room just to find my stuff. It's the video game equivalent of looking for your keys when you're desperate to just hit the road. If you get unlucky with piece placements, it can lead to 2 or 3 laps of a level before you're out. Meanwhile, Gamma's gameplay has become incredibly bogged down. The old bot still had a good bit of hustle, and his stages were quick and bombastic. SA2 over Eggman's the pudding with the kind of platforming you're buying a Sonic game to get away from. There is still no shortage of appeal in blowing things up, but this method of play shouldn't have been blown up along with it. The speedy core of this series being padded out is going to be a problem for a good while hereafter, as the amount of work required for a relatively short amount of gameplay get trickier and costlier to produce. These less liked secondary modes were probably seen as necessary by the developers to get a runtime that would justify rising prices, even if it means less time spent actually running. It's funny when people say Sonic had a rough transition to 3D. I mean, no one says that anymore except to mock people repeating an apparent cliche. But in my mind, we started on great form, and it's when they tried to course correct that things got sticky. This is the polish that wipes away charm. In years past, I'd knuckle down and put up with the parts I was growing to dislike, since these were the keys to more speed stages. But with each revisit, the parts I don't like get more numerous, and their presence stings more and more. And now I'm not even jiving with the speed stages as much. I'm sorry to say, but I've fallen out of love with this game.
Barely made it.
The story, however? Nope, still love it. This is my favourite Sonic plot. For starters, the presentation has shaken off all of the old stiffness. Instead, now when its failings be cool, it's goofy as hell, so that's a win-win. Scenes are a lot more dynamic, and there's a much greater use of visual storytelling, all expressed through a ton more energy. Beginning in media res with Sonic captive aboard a gun chopper, the more mature angle is immediately established as Sonic breaks loose, with his captors none too happy.
I'm a hero, Jack.
Damn, I didn't know they went that far. I wouldn't have censored the cursing, but then I wouldn't want to piss off Gun, or the ESRB anyway. Amazing bit of foreshadowing as Sonic falls to Earth, and further falling into the one stage that gets all the praise. But our city escape is cut short by Shadow. Even with its shoddy mixing, this scene is still awesome. Shadow using an emerald to clown on Sonic, who's still quick enough to put together Shadow's trick, and that Gun has mixed up the two. A plot beat which makes a lot more sense with Shadow's old design, but still works if you subscribe to the idea that Gun is just throwing Sonic under the truck to buy time while they try and get Shadow back under wraps.
Too easy for me.
Still, this whole thing's a little sillier than I remember it.
This door looks different from others.
Very odd way of putting it, Sonic. You mean like a door through reality?
No time to hang out with the likes of you.
Well, I guess I am getting hung in a moment. And speaking of Gun, a detail I adore. In most every stage except where appropriate, you're fighting Guncraft instead of Badniks. Damn, this is morbid. But then Gerald was working with Gun, so in a roundabout way, you still sort of are fighting Robotnik's creations. I love how the enemy roster is used to bolster the storytelling through gameplay, how it hints that Gun are the real villains here. And this is far from the only way their presence flips the script. SA2 winds up as far from retro as Gerald was from anti-retrovirals. In SA1 and various not adventure adventures hereafter, Eggman attempts to tame a beast to do his bidding and it backfires. Here, the biggest monster of them all, the government, does the same to Gerald Robotnik, which comes back around to bite them. This plot also puts a new twist on the dynamic that Robotnik has had with Knuckles and Chaos, with him and the new Hogness working together on near enough equal footing to achieve their own ends, with Rouge a not quite rogue agent. This shuffling of the deck is great, massively expands the setting and gives each character a ton of room to bounce off each other. Shadow's a joy in this, and his characterization really caught me off guard. The image he has as a gruff, brooding killjoy is an invention of the later games which bleeds back over into this one, because in his debut title, he's hammier than a hog roast. This is why him and Sonic play off of each other so well. They're both massive egos who enjoy the thrill of the adventure. The only thing which can get under their skin is someone on equal footing. Sonic's cool cockiness versus Shadow's flippant arrogance. The ways in which they're similar highlight their differences, which is a strong basis for a thematic rival. Sonic is a laid-back free spirit who does actually care, meanwhile Shadow's own good nature is behind a much more opaque layer of broken memories. Sonic's drive to do the right thing for no other reason than he feels it's the right thing to do is set against Shadow committing evil for reasons he can't fully remember. Bit harsh there, Maria? It's a nice simple contrast, but you can pull a few layers out of it. For all Shadow seems to steal the show, he only works so well because Sonic is on top form here. This is my favourite take on his character outside of the OVA and storybook games. Still, there's a lot of this story that isn't quite how I remember it.
Just how could I have let this happen to me?
He definitely wasn't that excited about the emeralds.
I didn't do anything wrong. I'm leaving.
Oh wait, I've been playing the Sonic Adventure 2 randomizer. I guess I'm not too lazy to install mods. It's funny though, the way randomizer skews the story is the way I often saw other people treat it, as though the game is utterly insane and nonsensical. It's a testament to SA2's impact in the Sonic fandom that 2 decades on, we are still seeing bitter arguments and pushback over this game's initial hype. We'll get into the biggest reason later, but as always, it's never just one thing. One video in particular stands out as a rallying point for all of this. It wasn't the first, but it was the biggest. I myself never watched it. To be frank, I've seen more of this man's cock than his content, but let's check it out. Now I've seen this man's whole ass too. Okay, that's a bit much. It was mostly just weak critiques interspersed with a few easy gags. Though, it's hard to read what's meant to be proper digs versus a bit because they're about on par when it comes to actually tackling the game. I realise I'm beating a long dead horse here, but look at that number. I'm confident when I say this is the source of many a second-hand opinion. Even Some Call Me Johnny, who I quite like, falls into a few of the same traps with this title. He'd grown up with it, but gotten to the point of noticing holes which massively hurt the experience for him. For a few years, I took this as a bitter pill to swallow. Now I plain just don't agree. Playing the randomizer with its goofy comedy and skewing of scenes got me thinking about how we primarily used to tackle stories, especially in games critique of the early 2010s. Back then, it was the first tentative breakaways from the AVGN and Nostalgia Critic, a bash at more serious critique but with a lot of vestigial holdovers. This obviously had an impact on how stories were handled, which is still lingering today. They were mostly used as joke bait or picked apart to look for flaws, tending to have a very literal and overly rational view, with a heavy preoccupation on pointing out perceived logical shortcomings and characters acting suboptimally in any given moment as the main means of judging a story as a whole. This is still common today, and it likely always will be. And this is because it's fun to do, fun to listen to, and utterly facile. It's a complaint requiring no specialist knowledge, broader understanding of the story or storytelling, or care for anything but what's happening in just that moment. All it takes to make a critique like this is a smidgen of attention bolstered by a massive lack of one. While not a bad thing to pick at when it does create a glaring issue, making these the primary focus of narrative critique turned poorly done videos nitpicky and presumptuous, where the goal is seemingly to outsmart the story rather than understand it. This isn't to mention that when you're focused on seeking out ways to contradict the plot, you're priming yourself to see things that aren't there, miss key details which undercut your grievances, and not give the story the benefit of the doubt. Worsened when someone isn't willing to wait on or recall information which would explain the problem. This gets really bad when the so-called flaw comes from the game trusting the player to pick up on things that aren't stated aloud, but are present through other means. Especially funny in what is at the end of the day, a game aimed at 12-year-olds. The one I see brought up most often in SA2's case is disbelief over Sonic using Chaos Control to escape death, which I totally don't subscribe to.
That blue hedgehog again, of all places.
This is yet another awesome scene. Sonic's cocky swagger, Eggman pulling his 300 IQ play, Sonic keeping his cool and getting out of dodge with a daring Hail Mary stunt. Honestly, even if this moment were contrived to hell and back, the right response would be, hey Logic Lord, leave your domain for a moment because you're getting shown up by Shonen. But you don't even have to because it's not contrived. As we saw in their first encounter, Sonic is sharp enough to spot Shadow's Chaos Control and has enough experience with the Emeralds to figure out his trick. A trick which is never said to be exclusive to him. There's also the implication that Shadow is based on Sonic.
Sonic, I think I've discovered what the ultimate life form is. It might be you.
And earlier, when he's locked up at Prison Island, Sonic's cell is covered in scrolls, presumably Gerald's from when he was imprisoned after the cover-up. And mad as this sounds, Sonic can read. They even made a sub-series to prove he's literate, and this image to prove he will let you die of exposure so he can keep reading. He loves it. It's far from a stretch that in an inescapable situation, Sonic would take a punt on not dying with a means the plot has established. Oh, but he did it with a fake emerald? Yeah mate, that only makes it more cool. The only ass pull going on here is wherever they're keeping those things. SA2 isn't airtight, and the presentation is often woeful, which I think is what causes people to not give it the benefit of the doubt and imagine these issues. But the storytelling is filled with these subtleties which it uses to keep a brisk pace. They're trusting kids to either pick up on this or not be so insufferably pedantic that they're asking pointless questions. And the thing is, on the internet, pointless questions can make for some rather pointed content. Another issue this story has, it's campy, tonally varied, and earnest. That didn't go over well. Think of how many people were filtered by Tidus's laugh, trying to put this scene down even when it was above their understanding. Sonic Adventure 2 is telling an atypical story for characters that look like this. It's a thriller about a government cover-up, with weapons of mass destruction, science run amok, a child with AIDS gets shot, capital punishment, and two-legged anthropomorphic hedgehogs. That last element is a sticking point. Some can't get past it. A character that looks like this shouldn't be in a story featuring that. This is a matter of taste, I can't talk you out of it. All I can say is it seems incredibly arbitrary and I'm glad I don't see it as you do. It's a tale that swings between moments of hot-blooded excitement and tragedy, all played with a heightened tone. If you're being kind to the game, you could understand that this ebb and flow is helpful so a story doesn't feel stagnant, and the contrast aids individual scenes in having their core emotions stand out. But it's much easier, not to mention faster, to call it inconsistent or indecisive, or dismiss it as something that can never belong in a Sonic game. I can't pretend I don't on some level understand that grievance, especially if you're an old head. This kind of story existing, not to mention being received well, means the series may get dragged further away from what you were liking about it. But to me as a kid, it was awesome seeing these characters I like suddenly thrust into a story with much higher stakes and a level of emotional depth I couldn't expect from them. Again, probably part of why it supplanted Sonic Adventure 1 for me when I was younger. Yes, Sonic has always flirted with darker elements, but SA2 is a total tonal surprise, an upset to the status quo. And it's like these characters are maturing along with you, you crazy 9-year-old. Then you grow up a bit more, realise it's stupid, and put it down in more than one sense of the word. Then perhaps you grow up a bit more and rediscover how to enjoy some of the sillier stuff, whether ironically or by reconnecting to childish joy, or if you're capable of it, both. And sometimes, looking back, it isn't as daft as you were trying to make it seem when you were in the process of proving your maturity. I think that overly critical and self-serious middle stage is important to expand your taste and start moving on to more challenging media, but I do think a certain amount of people get stuck there. You gotta make it one more step so you can have the best of both and not turn into a vacuous curmudgeon. Do I gotta break out the C.S. Lewis quote again? But that wasn't the thinking then, and games like this didn't do well under old reviews. I mean, people still say cringe, corny, and all that crap, but I think more of us are generally better at meeting stories halfway at this moment. Or we're at least a little more open to a greater emotional range and appreciating something a bit more pulpy or melodramatic. I've seen this with the Metal Gear Solids, Devil May Cry's, and Yakuza series. A good number of us have moved past just going, "Ooh, goofy Japanese game," and appreciating that something being eccentric, atypical, and maybe a little awkward doesn't mean it can't also speak to you on a deeper level and carry genuine ideas. Problems with Sonic Adventure 2's story come primarily from lackluster presentation, vocal direction, and subpar presentation. Picking at minor inconsistencies is attacking the symptoms without trying to understand the cause. Nowadays, we are seeing people giving the game props and breaking down its flaws from a position of care instead of using the game as a platform for bits. Or your bits, am I right, Sunshine? Sorry, I don't actually know anything more about this guy. I'm just ribbing. I am not pro or anti-Jared. I'm Jared neutral. I find the way we treat media today is both better and worse, which I feel comes from the fact that there are just so many more people making videos nowadays in a variety of styles, not beholden to or half-heartedly reinventing a genre. And this does mean there are so many more dogshit opinions alongside them, and the rage bait is more sinister than ever, and many of the poorer trappings of these old videos still persist today, but without the excuse of irony or the space still being in its infancy. Please don't let this section read as pure distaste, however. It's fun and honestly kinda nostalgic to just cut loose, not think too deeply and pull a game apart a bit. The techniques these old videos used aren't inherently poor, but when they're all you have to work with, you're going to be limited in scope. If you use a format through which to express your opinions, said opinions are going to start taking a certain shape. Though, there is an embarrassing thing I must admit. This section went through a lot of trimming down, shuffling, and having to expand the scope, and honestly even now there's big chunks I want to change because it feels like I've been made victim to an odd consensus. Every Sonic Adventure 2 retrospective talks about how there's been this great pushback, and I've regurgitated that narrative. I felt it was true in my bones. But obviously it'd be a flimsy skeleton for a video without proof, so I went looking for examples. Only to find, at best, 2 or 3 videos. Only one of which had any impact. Besides that, I found a smattering of forum threads mostly focused on gameplay flaws, followed by a stream of people coming out to defend Sonic Adventure 2. I've heard, and I've felt, and I swear I can recall people turning on this game's story, and perhaps they did. But ironically, the biggest evidence of this happening has been people who like the game saying that it happened. Funnily enough, I think we say it because we want this game to be part of a grander narrative with light and dark, when really, for most, the sun shines out of this game's arse. What's annoying about all of this? Even detached from larger discussion, Sonic Adventure 2 is a great specimen to talk about how an overly literal, nitpicky viewing of narratives can handicap your ability to enjoy something. How ignoring theming, subtext, and hype to be curmudgeonly is a contrite and easy way to make any tale look flawed without needing much thought, because, well, Sonic Adventure 2 does appear very flawed. It has all of those markers, but is an enjoyable ride regardless. When breaking down stories, you've got to be patient. You've got to look for non-obvious patterns, and when you see something that doesn't immediately make sense, don't immediately ding it as though something has gone wrong. If you give the benefit of the doubt, more often than not, you will be rewarded for it. Before we move on to Heroes, I have to talk about the randomizer itself. It's just been languishing in the background. But before I can, I have to issue an apology to a friend of mine, Chariot Rider. When I was planning this video over a year ago, this section was initially much more about randomness, and storytelling was only a side thing. But I'd commissioned him to do a video digging properly into randomization in games, as he's an expert on roguelikes and their like. He made a video which is now uploaded on his own channel, and as someone whose time is way more valuable than mine, I implore you to check him out. Do that anyway, because he's a mate, he makes good stuff, and has covered games even more obscure than what I've tackled. Yeah, I'm not kidding. Come for the comer, stay for game analysis, leagues more intelligent than I can muster. Far less painful puns, too. When the plan changed, I then hoped the randomizer would spit out a semi-comprehensible and full story for a mock synopsis. Yes, I was depending on a slot machine for this. Turns out I'm also an old-fashioned gambling addict. Here's the thing with the randomizer. Played with friends or before an audience, it's unbelievably funny. And I know if I had this when I was 10 or 11, it would be the best thing in the world. The perfect comedy machine for kid me's tastes.
Fuck me! A Chaos Emerald!
Fucking
Or a few 30-year-olds laughing when the cartoon hedgehog says a naughty word. When played alone as an adult, it's still a workable comedy slot machine, but the moments I really want are the ones that skim on the surface of sensical. The odd thrill of a scene, which makes sense in a way where the actors remember what they're trying to be doing, but have forgotten all of their actual lines. This thing is also incredibly customizable, and I can fine-tune the oddness to my tastes. But despite the fact it spits out what I find funny far less frequently, I like to play pure random, as it makes those moments much more valuable. I've been told by many I often unnecessarily take the hard path in everything I do, and I'm aware of it. The fact I do it for something this unbelievably pointless makes that hard to ignore. The gameplay side of the equation is no less fascinating. One run turned into a Chaos Revenge arc, him up in space taking out Gerald's experiments and absolutely demolishing the speed and mech stages. Ow, 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 ow. Meanwhile, I can only imagine this takes place after the game, with Eggman having lost his mind and Keys post-defeat. And especially post this line from Tails, I hate it so much.
I don't know, but what I do know is we all did it together.
And after that, he tries to be Sonic with actually pretty lore-accurate success. No need for the wrong trousers, because this guy's got legs. Though after the audio mixing on this game, I think I need a grommet. The most fun I had was with speed characters in mech levels. The platforming meant for these more lumbering lads was a joy as these lively Luddites. While the architecture and jumps are a ton flatter, it reintroduced the SA1 thrill of being able to clear massive chunks of stages in a single bound, climb atop scenery the mechs would struggle with. These are, with a little bit of work, serviceable speed stages with their own thrills, a simplistic, more typical platform arena that Sonic can absolutely dominate, showing off what's so unique about him. Most randomizers are focused on remixing the gameplay in a way that makes it fresh for an old hand at it. It challenges skill mastery by removing memorization from the equation and asking you to make do. SA2 Rando is instead focused on comedy with slapstick gameplay and incomprehensible cutscenes, and the earnest tone and focus on being cool make it a perfect fit for this kind of ridiculous mixer. It makes fun of the game so much better than any video out there can. There's always more to talk about with SA2, but let's leave off there for now. I'm sorry if all this internet talk is boring you. I must admit, sad as it is, I find it fascinating to talk about the way we talk and talked about games, but I understand that it may be tiresome to others. So for the next couple of games, let's take a break and have some fun with and without friends. Sega's hardware dreams are dead. The Adventure sub-series is over. But Sonic is about to undertake his biggest adventure yet, the adventure to his rivals' consoles, as he, and so many others, are about to make their multi-platform debut. This game doesn't want to be a bittersweet new beginning, but both the game and I are in weird territory. Memory cards on the table, I genuinely can't recall how I felt about this game as a kid, which probably means didn't leave a strong impression either way. That came way later. Around 10 years ago, I was tying up some video game loose ends, and part of that was replaying my way through the Sonic series with the intent of finally finishing the games I hadn't, cleaning up Heroes, Shadow, the Rush titles, the storybook games, and Unleashed. I only gave up on Chronicles and the only game to rival its dullness, Rivals. It was here I found myself utterly disliking Heroes. I did not blast through with Sonic speed, and that's because I had 11 chains around those ankles. In the years since, I felt this was one of the worst entries in the series. You're always in its best mode of play, but that best is at best fine. For all we can gripe about gimmicks, alternative playstyles, and gimmicky alternative playstyles, Hero's solution of beating the same game 4 times and grabbing emeralds in a returning pipe special stage along the way hogs your time far worse than anything else. Replaying a game out of enthusiasm is one thing. Requirement is quite another. It didn't exactly feel worth it to unlock one more boss fight and a conclusion to its incredibly minimalist story. And I was right. It wasn't worth it. Though, coming back, to dispel some of the illusion, of course I actually play the game's vanilla a bit to remember the baseline experience before I introduce my stupid stipulation. Revisiting Heroes just to do a bit of a playthrough without feeling the need to get all the way to last story makes for a much better, not to mention breezier time. While my opinion on SA2 has dipped somewhat, Heroes has risen in my estimation, which I really didn't expect. Don't get me wrong, it's not by a great deal, but I've gone from thinking it's utterly tedious to serviceable if we don't have to spend that long together. An inoffensive base which ruins itself via awful structure, and which I in the past ruined for myself by adhering to said structure and making completion a have-to-do. I'm not a 100% kind of guy. I don't think that if a game can't remain consistently enjoyable up until the moment every last pixel has been prodded that it's a war crime. If I've had a few hours of fun and I'm feeling it fading, I'm happy to cash in my chips and take the good nowadays. But when that's about 25% of the way to credits, I can't exactly give the game credit. It literally runs itself ragged, especially when following the lineup you're going normal, hard, easy, chaotix, which doesn't exactly charm me. This is such a weird menu. Obviously they're not going to snub Sonic, not till next game anyway, but that means the escalation is all out of whack if you follow the order suggested by the design. And really, that's only to start when it comes to how weird this game is. On the surface, this multi-platform debut looks like it's playing it safe. We have a lighter retro aesthetic, an out-of-the-way story, and a singular continuous gameplay style. This all looks like something for newcomers with a little bit of everything to please old fans, but in actuality is so all over the map it could give a cartographer a run for their money. Heroes is designed not by committee but shotgun blast. We have the lightest tone the series has had in a while to wash the taste of SA2 out of our mouth, while reintroducing its premier bad boy, and it turns out plummeting from orbit has done the opposite of bringing him down to earth. His sharper edge cuts against the bright cartoony vibe, and he's put alongside newcomer and best bot Omega. Absolutely love this guy. The story wants to be a little bit of everything for everyone, new and old, but that just means it isn't much of anything for anyone. Though I imagine after Adventure that's welcome to some, though not to me. The gameplay's the same way. We're back to nothing but straight shot A to B levels focused on SA2 style platforming. The classic Tails follows Sonic flourish of the 2D days has been reintroduced, but expanded from simplistic scene setting to the most complex gameplay system outside of Chronicles, including tons of context-sensitive obstacles to memorize, along with actual combat mechanics with health bars, stuns, limit breaks, and a level-by-level leveling system, which at level 3 more or less turns off the more complex mechanics through sheer damage output, which is really funny. Overall, Heroes is a far more static title, with physics thoroughly supplanted by systems. What highlights this strongest is how it handles alternative routes. Before, these tested mastery over mechanics. Here, they're straight up pointed out and offered to the player, with the question not being proficiency but preference for one gameplay style over another. I said SA2 had the levels telling you how to play, well now Heroes has the zeros join in on the conversation.
Let's leave it to Sonic!
Literally. Did you know the config code for turning off chatter is listed as shut up? When shutting up is a value, silence is golden. The way the player tackles each stage truly feels like the polar opposite of where the series started, where before we had a small pool of moves deep as an ocean in their application, now it's a well of mechanics and each is just a drop in the bucket with 1 or 2 strict applications each. Take flight or gliding. Where before they were means of freeform movement, now they are heavily clamped down and used in response to specific stimuli, and to me far less stimulating for it. Knuckles can't even climb. This game has so little freedom to it, no open-ended application of movement mechanics outside of exploiting glitches and oversights. It's the oddest thing. On the surface, this game looks like a throwback, but it's one that's thrown out most everything from way on back. An inscrutable patchwork of retro affectations and new experiments. Fascinating to think about, and really enough to offer for a playthrough. It has nice environments, some good music, and the sheer plethora of mechanics and decent set pieces kept me brain activated through Team Sonic. But my view was dimming as early as Team Dark as I ran into a solid wall of repetition. One which not even a level 3 Omega could hope to breach. And I had to put it down. Which I've honestly done more than I can remember. An odd fact about myself. I have 4 copies of Sonic Heroes, a pretty large collection for which I have no recollection. I got the first copy when the game came out, I got the second because I lost the first must have gotten jealous because at some point it reappeared, I don't even remember finding it, and as for the third and fourth, I couldn't even begin to tell you. It wasn't for love of the game, I can tell you that. So what do we do with this? You might be thinking, alright Snake, all 4 copies at once, 1 on each limb. We can talk about how time is fleeting and we can't possibly waste our lives playing the same game 4 times. Well, issue is, I've only just thought of that now, and I've actually gone and done the opposite. Instead of saving time, I've gone and wasted 3 times as much. Heroes Co-op, let's go.
Alright, so this is you.
Alright, this is me. Alright.
Alright, Swede, this is... Oh wait, this is me. Shit.
No, it isn't.
No,
Oh, this is a really good gimmick. Oh
Wait,
no,
I-
I like this.
Wait,
I don't know how
You
to
like
do
that
this.
gimmick of me never
Snake, you
giving...
can give me Snake, you can give me keyboard permission.
Yeah, I did. I'm not sure how I was worried SADX was too obvious when Heroes Co-op was on the agenda, but here we are.
What is the swap buttons again?
It's 1 and 2.
Swede, you bastard! I've experienced the real superpower of teamwork, and I've got to say, it's more a three-legged race. For this playthrough, I was joined by fellow YouTuber Hot Cider and upcoming podcast superstar and Dane, Swede. In case you're wondering, no, we didn't do this with some kind of mod to grant all 3 characters simultaneous control. If by some miracle that exists, I want to know about it yesterday. Please send me a link. We instead gave ourselves the worst possible experience. Played over Parsec with keyboard controls. What can I say? We may have been team players, but our gamepads sure weren't. We took a character each, trading level by level, and honor ruled that as soon as control swapped, our hands stopped. So what went wrong here? I mean, there's plenty of fertile ground for cock-ups, but that's not things going wrong. The added room for messing up was the point, hoping we'd screw up enough that it'd be funny, but not so much it gets tiresome. No, the issue here is way more abstract. My premise was wrong. I'm not certain why, but I came into this one with a weird agenda, wanting to bemoan the idea that co-op inherently makes a game better. On the face of it, I was getting what I wanted. Heroes was worse because of how we played. It was slower, clunkier, time challenges now have the added spice of latency, on an individual level may as well have been luck-based, but this was all undermined not only by the fact this ramshackle way of playing the game would really prove nothing, but also because it was genuinely entertaining.
What?
I think
All
that's
of them go!
I think that's a Swede problem to deal with.
I see you're hanging on for dear life.
Safe.
Bitch.
Scar, help me.
No.
Oh, oh my god!
Oh, fucking hell. Man, no, you really know how to build a Magman.
Heroes Co-op in this fashion is a start and stop mess. A sort of chain-together Child's Edition that's only marginally less hellish. At least until hell comes to you. As this isn't concurrent co-op, the lead player is in the hot seat and that lights a fire under your ass. And it severely limited how we could approach the game in ways that made each obstacle much more interesting. It at times made us greedy, not wanting to hand over and forcing our current character to try and tackle a scenario they're not built for. Or else panicking and essentially lobbing the baton at a no more ready runner when the chips were down. Well, that was in my head.
Co-op doesn't automatically make a game better? I don't know.
Swedes, you're selected.
Yeah, Swede.
Oh, sorry.
Sweet, sweet.
I will say the task of this game does have a lot of glitching food points.
Oh wait, shit, that was moving to Swede. There we go.
Well, we don't need rings for it going.
What the hell?
Nowhere.
You can do it. Yeah,
There's a road on the right, you can fly to it.
Wait, I can!
We don't need any rings where we're going, right? Yeah.
Or trying to call out ahead of time when we'd need to make a switch, giving the game much more mental load.
Okay, should we go
Nah.
into Tails mode for this? Or...
No, I think we
I've got the synopsis here. Here's the
You don't want to
official.
go into Tails mode.
Well, I was going to say, why don't we go into Tails mode, but Snake takes the reins? Cause
Yeah, you do that, Snake.
Are you sure? Alright. We're playing Daddy's in control now.
Well, we're playing Daddy has less latency.
Wait, why am I going backwards? Despite each of us acting individually, these moments of genuine challenge forced a teamwork which doesn't exist in the base game, as we started needing to plot and think several steps ahead. Where played normally, the bosses in Heroes are trivial. Now we had to put our heads together to counter them. It's almost as if they got an extra layer of mechanics, even if it was really just us having to wrangle our way past a newfound weakness. When victories and failures are shared, they feel much greater. My memories of this playthrough are bolstered through the moments we had together. We pushed through Sonic's story and I figured that'd be our lot, because my god, it was a lot. But then the question was asked, are we gonna do final story? I was baffled by the suggestion until it was pointed out we could just download a save. Now that's co-op. As Pacamac might say, 4 dickheads are better than 1. This is the real superpower of teamwork. with the assistance of our fourth anonymous friend. What am I made of? Network lag and an uncanny level of persistence when it comes to dumb ideas. We beat Metal Sonic, and a good time was had. So, why did I seemingly go in hoping for the opposite? Rereading my earliest notes gives me an idea, and it points me back to a time in my life pretty close to the playthrough which made me initially hate Heroes. I used to do Let's Plays on YouTube, and I still consider them a big part of my style. What I initially really wanted to do was weird video game adventures and experiments, inspired by stuff like Boat Murdered and forum event Let's Plays, as well as a few of my own experiences. One of them was, and I swear not a word of a lie, an exciting and politically tense gang war on a dark RP server I had that stuck with me for years afterwards. I know how absurd it sounds. I joined a server, within an hour got the mayor position, and decided to host one-on-one meetings with the locals of the server so that I was at least engaging with them. A new guy appears, and insists over and over again that I should abuse my power, and eventually, I do. I have him arrested on the spot. After his release, he goes into the underworld and becomes the Mafia Don, one with a pretty big chip on his shoulder over me giving him exactly what he wanted. While he's plotting against the state, I'm building up police forces, becoming fast friends with one of the newer recruits who was actually playing his role as a rookie with no shortage of gusto. After a few run-ins with the newly emboldened Mafia, they manage a successful takeover of the station, taking me hostage and starting to make demands. I manage to bluff for long enough that the rookie is able to stage a rescue, whereafter we turn the takeover against them by trapping the lot inside. It was a perfect evening of tension, backstabbing, and so many little interactions. Everyone felt engaged and in character, happy to play their parts. Dark RP is so awful, but this tricked me into believing it could work when really, an evening like that is luck you could trade for a lottery ticket with how well the mode is often played. This is something you could only consistently get with actors, which, well, if I had the chops to manage people like that, I'd be making short films, not fake bizarro gameplay adventures. And besides, actors would kind of defeat the point. I'd know it would be inauthentic. So with some mates in tow, I have tried to satisfy this odd craving of trying to play games in weird ways to draw a unique experience out. I'm not a modder, far from technically minded, but I like to tinker with and look at games from unique angles. I tried to do a co-op Wildlands LP, max difficulty, no HUD, tons of editing. It was one of the most satisfying and laborious things I've ever tried to produce, and thanks to scheduling and other commitments, was never finished. There's also a perpetual voxel turf video on the horizon, where, over a year ago now, over several weeks, did bring some mates onto a server to play this bizarre little-known Gang War SimCity Grand Theft Auto Minecraft clone. It seems like a game that could create so many stories, but it is just so absurdly dull in totality. While we were doing our sessions, I was still in playing mode, testing the systems and exploring the game, hoping a narrative would bloom out of what we were doing. The others, meanwhile, quickly found an exploit and won the match, citing boredom with the game to push them to get it over with as quickly as possible. It's no shade on them, the game is as dull as they deem it, but it just kinda scuppered plans. I've long wanted to host a Half-Life 2 three-legged race where two teams of three try to beat Half-Life 2 the fastest, one controlling Gordon's movement, one his aim, and the third his interaction and shooting. Then there's Ex-Commandolus, which honestly was the best this itch has ever been scratched. With this premise, was I coming in subconsciously bitter, trying to disregard an old want even as I'm satisfying it? This video is, in a roundabout way, just doing what I've always wanted to do, which is what I do anyway. I say this because I don't begrudge playing the series, the format, whatever wide pigeonhole I've made for myself here. As weird as it sounds, I kind of got what I wanted without realizing it, without appreciating it, without putting together that I have just been relaying odd and unique experiences I've had with games, trying not to make it artificial, but knowing it kind of has to be by the very nature of it being an active pursuit. Heroes Co-op had me going in with a forced idea and by luck having to abandon it. It going wrong made this more organic. And really, in a way, the fact things have gone wrong with this video isn't a bug, it's a feature, only contrived because of how I've had to narrativize, trim, and interpret the experiences. Playing is still sort of a compromise, but one of practicality. It means I don't have to bug people with my weird ideas most of the time and make them play games in ways only I find fun or fruitful. But I do enjoy the company now and again, and when I do reach out, it usually works out fun, but with so much more editing afterwards. When I look at really big streamers who get to host nation wars in Rust or whatever, I feel I don't have the pull and I have no idea where I'd start. So there we go. I may have zero childhood memories of Sonic Heroes, but it did let me zero in on an old want that I'd forgot I had. We move on to the only non-Sonic game in this video series with 2005's Shadow the Hedgehog. popularly known as Ow the Edge, and more recently picking up the moniker Shadow 5. And besides my confusion considering there's no other Shadow to muddy the issue, shouldn't it really be Shad Ow 5? Regardless, what a year it was. I was looking forward to the 360, Total Overdose, and of course, the game we're playing right now. I was pretty pleased with 2 of those 3, and it's not much of a guessing game which one came up short. I've touched on it before with Narc, but the mid-2000s was such a fun time for mature mainstream video games. It's like a teenager going through an awkward phase of wanting to be seen as grown up and overcompensating with embarrassing, sophomoric grit. The shovelware GTA knockoffs were one thing, this is something else. This is a 12-year-old breaking out the frick word to look cool. And the tragedy is, this game could have been so much darker. Originally due for a teen rating, the introduction of the SRB Z10 made them hedge the edge, which is a goddamn shame. We could have had so much fucking more. And well, it's both funnier and more frustrating when placed next to its predecessor, Heroes.
Our next adventure awaits us, so there's no time to waste. Yeah, we're Sonic Heroes! What goes up?
Wading through 2 of the worst completion requirements back to back left me miserable. When followed by the relatively lean Sonic 06, I found myself downright appreciating that game for not wasting my time. But it gets so much worse, creating a feeling of sunk cost that the prior game can't. Fun fact, this structure was an idea floated for SA2 to get a bunch of useless information and flaccid ultimatums, and your reward for doing so is a canon ending granting a definitive answer to who Shadow is. Shadow makes for one of the meanwhile you'll land on the ending of others. You can fob off a character in one level and get jumped to a timeline where you're getting along with them.
Curse it! I won't forget this. Shadow, I need to get back to my base and restore order. Help me get away from these pesky gun soldiers who are on my tail.
Welcome to Star Fox Assault, on the Senses. And getting to the canon ending means seeing this intro a minimum of 10 times, playing some of these stages a minimum of 10 times.
Don't touch the red fruit.
Sorry mate, what did you call me?
Disgusting black creatures.
Fuck you call them? The objectives are more often than not cleaning an entire level of enemies and finding hidden crap.
On the world and has built this theme park. What do you say? How about the 2 of us take all these rings back?
Get your fucking priorities in order, Tails. Was everyone really hot on this gameplay? Did we really love emerald hunting and I just never got the memo? This can't have been inspired by an inability to find the complaints department. They were practically overcorrecting on some issues while doubling down on their worst impulses. I find myself so annoyed with this structure because I'm quite liking the gameplay. Sort of. It controls better than Heroes. It's a lot less contextual and feels a teensy bit more freeform. You got a bunch more moves and you can use them in their own way. A sort of diagonal step back in Adventure's direction. The vehicles are all totally redundant as for 1, you're faster, and 2, you turn better, but they get a pass because Shadow on a motorbike is awesome and stupid. As for its other big feature, well, I have no issue with a Sonic-ish title having firearms as a USP. My problem is, it's less interesting than when they weren't. Despite shooting being a tertiary feature at best, both SA1 and 2 managed far more bang for their buck. Gamma's time mechanic is undercut by his levels being over quicker than your average Forces A rank, but he's still a good time. Meanwhile, the mech levels frame shooting as a sideshow attraction that you platform through, and they do occasionally manage to put a neat twist on this very simple system. The problem with Shadow's gameplay is most of the time it just feels bolted onto a normal Sonic title with no further imagination or expansion. But I do something like this in a stage, and I totally see how Sonic gameplay plus Shadow gunplay sounds absolutely banging. The issue is that this is still the standard Sonic combat, made up mostly of foes you can very easily outmaneuver and totally ignore. All my ammo pool represents is how many more homing attacks I now don't have to do. And as simple as the homing attack is, that's still a move that has risk, reward, and setup. This needed more aggressive foes and a lot more going on. I should be ramping off hills, running along walls, and homing attacking one foe to dodge gunfire from another, all while whittling down these foes or trying to maneuver in such a way where I can hit a weak point. As it stands, all weapons do is expedite deleting enemies. Enemies who, rather than being beefed up to account for and make the weapon system interesting, are forced onto the player via the terrible objective system. Shadow smashing aliens with a stop sign deserves better than this. If only there was a way to improve this experience. No. We've done out of nowhere patch jobs. I need something else. I need something stronger. and I think I've got it. If Shadow gets to cheat death, seems only fair I get to join him. This won't be any regular replay. This is gonna be an action replay. Off we go. Oh, well, low gravity's already pulling its weight, or not as the case may be. Hey Shadow, look, it's Maria. Aw, he's over what's left of the moon about it. Go, get your revenge. Cheats are awesome. Yeah, give me the keys. I was done with hunting missions 2 games ago. Oh yeah, if looking for crap in the objectives wasn't fun enough, you also have 5 keys per stage to get a bonus guffin. But with cheats, I've got the keys to the kingdom. And further speaking of keys, I guess Chaotix is trying to break into Eggman's bank account after they got stiffed last time. Shame I haven't turned on infinite rings, or I could have covered them. In we go. Okay, we're in bad territory here with the giant glitchy Rouge. I kinda feel like I'm looking at someone's fetish. It seems Eggman keeps his own Chow Garden, so let me just mow the lawn a little.
Death to all who oppose me!
Chaos! Bless!
Alright, neutral path, which, ironically, despite the name, is the only good part of the game. And the only objective here is to make it to the end. I've just the thing.
Behold the ultimate power!
Fulfill this promise.
Long time no see.
I love how the limit break for heroic actions doesn't help at all with a majority of hero objectives, but does allow you to skip all of the neutral, meaning good, meaning neutral, content. Guess we'll call this chaotic good. So I may have just accidentally cheated myself out of the best part of the game. Literally.
Perfect.
And now all I'm left with is the Billy Hatcher gun and a long list of people I need to kill. You know, it's funny how conventional weapons just down soldiers because painfully maiming people with gunfire is ESRB 10 material, but the chicken sucker don't care. Call that murder most foul. At the end of the day, the list of cheats available in Shadow is far from the worst I've seen, but is pretty mediocre, pretty hog standard. My frontrunner for cheat codes is a pretty obvious pick. It's the 3D era of the GTA series. I never beat any of these games because I was too busy partaking in giant chases, turning on riot mode and playing out my own little versions of the Warriors before that game was even announced, and making cars fly, then standing on top of them to do some aerial photography. What I essentially like out of cheats are ones that expand or modify the game I'm playing, and these were understandably rarer. Shadow has a few cheats like this, messing with the gravity, changing around player models, and messing with visual effects. It's all very amusing. For the most part, however, it's the bread and butter stuff. Infinite lives, rings, ammo. At least infinite power is pretty amusing for a time. Just like Shadow is now a charming relic of a bygone era, the expectation of having cheat codes, at least on the console, is also antiquated. And Shadow may have cheated death, but the cheats themselves were a lot less lucky, though they've been subject to an equal number of experiments. So let's discuss. Why did cheats die? Well, there are a few reasons. One isn't quite so sinister, more of an unfortunate side effect of game development getting easier. Many cheat codes were in actuality debugging tools to aid testing. If you wanted to check for bugs, you could play vanilla over and over again, or simply put in a bit of code that lets you quickly access the content you need to QA. And hey, if the code is already there and doesn't break the game, there's little reason not to let the player have at it. As game development tools and testing pipelines were streamlined over the years, the need for debugging codes was no longer necessary, and so cheats were no longer a naturally occurring byproduct of game creation but something that had to be inserted manually, which naturally led to there being less of them. Though I do believe cheats were also phased out with a degree of intent. Achievements and trophies were the start of it. While some games did disable Chivos if you were a cheater, which was a perfect compromise, many just neglected cheats as now they were not only more effort, they were in conflict with the generation's favourite new pastime of trophy hunting. It was shortly after I started noticing a few games selling cheats as DLC. I even bought one for Crackdown despite being more than a little bitter that this was something I was used to getting for free. The earliest title I remember seeing the ability to buy in-game money using actual cash was The Godfather on 360. God, what a racket. I love this era, but looking back, it's ground zero for what was going to become today's most insidious monetization practices. And besides that, we had a focus on online gaming which killed a lot of split-screen support, and worst of all, persistent profiles and the steady growth of the live service model along with it. The live service model really is the endpoint of all of this. We've gone from having cheats to being cheated. Over time, we've steadily got less control over, not to mention just plain less of what we buy. Like I mentioned with Sonic Jam, 10, 20 years ago, games were not as established, so giving away cheats to the audience was probably seen as just good practice for a few more sales. Now it's the opposite. Games are big business, likely in the saturation phase, and what before was free to get you in is now better seen as portioned off and sold for further profits. Well, update. Thanks, Sony. I didn't realize you could hear me editing, but I didn't realize that was going to go up to fucking disk drives. Big publishers don't like free cheats and mods because it's you getting something out of their product outside of their full control. So we've seen them trying to bring both into the ecosystem. Bethesda has tried paid mods twice. When it was shot down the first time, they just waited to try again, announcing it with less fanfare. Companies are willing and able to outweigh those who complain while they gather an audience without the same expectations. And in the same vein, they are not going to give up on live service unless forced to, because a suit somewhere does believe that if they can kill games you bought, you're just going to go and buy their new one. They'll kill the past so they can rent out the present. What a future we're in. Go check out StopKillingGames.com, by the way. Europeans, of which I used to be one, may be able to at least hinder one of the modern industry's worst habits. All of this is why I'm happy mostly sticking to the old and the indie and the weird games, and only dipping my toes in AAA if something comes across my radar that I'm really interested in. I am skeptical of big companies and have no particular affinity or expectations of any of them. Though, I don't think I'm a pessimist. Last year there was a trend of gaming is dead videos which, despite what I've been saying, I found utterly shallow and pandering. Willfully miserable pieces of ill-thought-out schlock, which at best were made to sell an equally miserable audience their own cynicism back to them. But then, if I only played AAA, yeah, I'd be miserable too. The difference is I'm aware I'm not trapped in the ecosystem, and neither are you. You could go and play all the old games from the past you deify that you missed out on, and the indie scene I so often see disregarded as nothing but gay depression because to acknowledge it would undercut your grievances. Trust me, man, sometimes there's some pretty sick gameplay between bouts of depression. But that aside, you have years of old stuff to catch up on, and they still have cheat codes so you can mess with them to your heart's content. They didn't quite save Shadow, however. I still find that underneath all this edge is a very dull game. One that is still an intriguing relic. One that represents some of the mid-2000s ideas of what would sell. It was misguided, it was silly. And it's something I do miss about the industry, when they were stupid in this way. Before we get to the big one, I do have an observation on Shadow that I've not seen anyone else ever make. Sonic Adventure 2, Heroes, and Shadow the Hedgehog make up the most preposterous trilogy in gaming. Now, the reason no one has made this observation is it sounds like total bollocks, but hear me out. This is the Shadow trilogy. In it we have his origin, his lowest point, and his conclusion. Why is this bizarre? Well, for one, it's a trilogy that starts on the second game in a sub-series, and within this story we have his origin, lowest point, and, conclusion. The problem is, Sega saw how much people liked Shadow and ran back the decision to kill him at a speed that would make Sonic green with envy. It's a bit awkward, but it's fine, we can salvage it. After all, this is a series that isn't afraid to bring back characters well past the point of relevancy. It's named after one. So we pop Shads in a tube and give him amnesia. Make his survival a subplot in the background of a light-hearted retro throwback game.
Talk about being stubborn and full of surprises.
Is that how you respond to seeing someone you thought burned up in atmosphere alive and well, you absolute bundle of pricks? Bolt on a question about if he's the real Shadow and hey, we're at least iterating on an idea. Before he couldn't trust his memories, now he can't even trust his authenticity. Then close off this absurd story in a spin-off that will not only answer the question we already had an answer to, but ask a ton of rhetorical ones to bulk that out. It turns out the reason Shadow's alive is that he didn't die. Fascinating. It does at least have the sense to flesh out and add on to the events of Sonic Adventure 2. I mean, it kinda has to justify its existence, but my revisits to the earlier title aren't enhanced by ideas this game introduced. Then to jump the gun a bit, I love how 06 plays as an epilogue to all this madness. Shadow overcoming his past to the point that he's able to work with Gun, going from Shadow 5 to 5-0. He's a government operator, total badass, and he has a crew who are more ride or die than Team Sonic ever was, which is likely cause this bundle of pricks didn't name it after himself. With Shadow on the side of good and with agency backing, he's far more capable than the Blue Bell End ever was. While Sonic is barely keeping the situation from spiraling out of control, Shadow's the one getting answers and dealing with the actual problem. And there's a very funny reason for this. Shiro Maekawa, Shadow's designer, was the writer on 06, and he is a man who has said that he has a stronger bond with Shadow than his own family, so may have been playing favourites. Unfortunately for Shadow, and Shiro I suppose, Sonic may have been saved here, but this was Shadow's kiss of death. After the response 06 created, Sega tried very hard to fix the series' reputation, and its method of doing this was making sure it couldn't even be passingly like it was in this era for a very, very long time. Meaning after this impromptu trilogy and epilogue, featuring Shadow figuring out who he is, he's unceremoniously and ironically severed from his own backstory, going from villain to vegetable to Vegeta. I couldn't even call him a vestigial character because he doesn't have one. This game may leave me a little cold on him, but it means we can finally talk about the game that put him on ice. No, not that one, you twat. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's finally time for the big buggy blue bastard. This is the last game we have in today's lineup, as after this, Sonic would hang up his adventuring hat and run from it as fast as his steadily growing legs would carry him. It would take almost 2 indecisive decades for him to escape the black hole that is this game's reputation, and many a denser critic will keep trying to pull him back. This game has been documented from trash top to garbage tip. Here's my review. I've played worse. This wouldn't even be approaching the bottom of the barrel for games I've covered on my channel, and no, that's not because Sonic would clip through the thing. I've played games that are buggier. I've played games that are more boring. I've played games that are less charming. To add yet another video to the net bashing 06 would be flogging a dead hog. While not well constructed, it can be an amusing ride. I'd spent years being told Plan 9 from Outer Space is the worst film ever made. When I finally got around to watching it, I was instead very entertained. And Sonic 06 is the same way. It's flimsy, it's earnest, and while it is weird, there is a heart beating away in there. One which it at times follows at the expense of its brain. From my perspective as someone who has played games far more shoddy, weird, and worst of all boring than 06, the reaction to it can feel comparatively overblown. But then I have to remember that most people don't engage with games in the way that I do, and the mainstream controls the narrative on what games even exist. Sonic 06 doesn't rank anywhere near as bad as its damning reputation in my eyes, but let's talk about how it was forever damned. The reception and image of the series was already in something of a decline. Sega having to abandon its own hardware and jump to Nintendo, then multiplat, meant that not only had Sega lost, the Sonic series had failed in its original goal, which is a joystick to forever beat it with. After the glitchy re-releases didn't make a great impression, the original titles which followed started spinballing between identities harder than ever before. In Heroes, we had a lighthearted retro throwback to the glory days, featuring all the things people hated most about, at the time, modern Sonic. Then we immediately pivot to an edgy grimdark not Sonic adventure focused on an unfocused tale of self-discovery for a character who already figured out who they were 2 games back. The fanbase was already a laughingstock online. Its worst elements and most outspokenly weird members became the image of the average fan, to make mockery that much more quick and efficient, and the state of the games they were fans of certainly didn't help.
All these games that Sega cranks out, you guys just eat them. Like Sega takes a crap on a plate, you guys, they're ready with your spoons.
This isn't even going into the 4Kids changeover, which is a Thorndikey subject. Cynical as it sounds, I think we all like having something we can bash which we don't have to really engage with, and Sonic is in the unfortunate spot of being a well-known yet not well-renowned series, made for a purpose that's easy to call purely commercial rather than artistic, and one that it had failed at. It turns out Sega truly does what Nintendo don't: lose. It's for these reasons so many cheap shots get aimed its way. It's when a critic needs something they're pretty sure everyone agrees isn't worthy of respect. And if you do defend it, you're easily dismissed as a raging fan by association. It's the perfect petri dish for taking the piss. Lastly, Sonic 06 had actual hype behind it before release, which meant that when it crashed and burned, everyone was there to add fuel to the fire. An odd comparison, but we saw similar events play out with Cyberpunk 2077 and No Man's Sky. Far from the worst games in the world, but they had that reputation foisted upon them because they're the slips that everyone saw, and expectations are a multiplier for perceived quality, particularly when things get negative. I can't claim to be immune. The game I hated most is Dead Rising 4 for this exact reason. That game stings not only because of its raw shoddy mechanical experience, but everything it represents compounding upon it. A series I love losing its identity while pretending to be a return to the roots. Context has a massive impact on how you receive something. The game popularly considered to be the worst is very unlikely to actually be that way. All the worst game of all time is the most well known for being bad. The irony is, to achieve this, it also has to be interesting enough to be talked about. Let's say, like Retspray, Sonic Boom is on par with 06. If it is, then why didn't it stick in the culture the same way? Well, with 06 we have time, place, spread of mechanics, big heartfelt moments undercut by themselves. Boom doesn't really come across as trying to be anything special, and as such, neither was its failure. Boom lay in the wake of 06 and was dead on arrival. The outright worst game I own is maybe Why So Evil, and that's a game that's not going to crack any notable worst of all time lists. It's not from a big name and as such has no expectations to fall short of. It also means you don't have to hear about it incessantly, which means it won't wear you down. It has a clear intent towards being frustrating and shoddy so you don't feel tricked. It was cheaper than chips before the cost of living crisis, and within seconds of launching it you can see what you're in for. It even fails to be interesting in its shoddiness. To get genuinely upset at this, especially nowadays, would be a strange and transparently purposeful reaction. It inspiring a shrug would burn more calories than it's worth. There are games far more technically competent I like a whole lot less because context frames everything. Sonic 06 and Cyberpunk are essentially what happens when Jank has the misfortune to wind up in the crosshairs of a more mainstream or casual audience. It's like if Stalker or Xenos had been put in front of the COD crowd. The mismatch would have had it shot down faster than you can say ADS, and that would have set the tone of the conversation for a long time, if not all time. Any fruitful discussion about the games would be bogged down by having to actively set aside its popular image. It instead being allowed to exist in relative obscurity and have the right audience bubble around it work to its benefit, so it could be appreciated for what it actually was, undisturbed. This is how discussion works for a lot of media. Opinions are a race and the first word is first place. It sets the stage for the discussion, and to come at it from another angle starts to feel like it necessitates preamble to properly frame the audience. Or, admittedly, it could just be I'm too worn down by years of "why didn't you mention that" comments. Maybe that's why these videos keep getting longer. Another odder and older comparison, but I often feel like 2005 Lionhead game The Movies was an alright game at the wrong time. Another year and YouTube may have carried it. Sonic 06 was the wrong game at the right time, and that same website would be its pallbearer. As such, I don't need to play it wrong, or at all, because everyone else already has. What new is there to say about Sonic 06? You can go and see every which way it can fall apart before this video finishes uploading. Though I doubt we've seen the last of someone else turning it on and in an odd mix of optimistic pessimism, hoping it's going to break in some novel way they can act surprised or grumpy about. And the thing is, I can't even deny that they might find it. Sega rushed this game out for Christmas and in the process gave us YouTubers the gift that keeps on giving. Despite how it may sound, I'm not judging this behaviour. YouTube and Sonic 06 are equally broken games, and as such creators like anything about them that's reliable, and videos about 06 have historically done well. Or well, it may seem that way because you only ever see videos that do well, but the point I'm trying to make is there's a mountain of evidence that people love seeing this game get pulled apart. Something which is very easy to do as it serves up its most mockable elements to the player with very little resistance. And so it sticks around with the same events playing out over and over again. I found a lot of joy in some of these videos, and my fondness goes back a ways, starting with PokeCaptain's 2008 Let's Play of 06, where he and a group of friends got together to beat the game in a single sitting for the pleasure of a something awful forum. This Let's Play feels like a piece of bygone internet, something done for a specific community instead of a large anonymous audience. It had a forum thread and contests. It was a little event, unconcerned with things like algorithm or hitting it big. It feels more genuine than a video about 06 would today, and yes, I'm including myself in that approximation. This thing wasn't even on YouTube to begin with, since its video quality at the time was below their standards. Their treatment of the game, however, is much the same as it would be going forward for many others.
What the fuck?
They laugh, they question, they scream. Its ability to drive them up the wall is more reliable than many of its scripted sequences. Sonic 06 will always be Sonic 06. But the methods and motives by which people mock it would change. And this brings me, at long last, to the angle I'm going to cover Sonic 06 from. YouTube games. Titles that were, by design or otherwise, a reliable pick for, and I'm going to use the soulless term here, content creators. To do that, I first have to talk about a video that has stuck in my mind for a very long time. Vinny Superg's Analyzing YouTube Famous Games. The reason this video stuck with me kind of stings. I felt it had a lot of missed potential. I'll apologise up front to the creator as my disappointment is more than a little unfair. I saw the title, imagined what it would be in my head, and was let down because the video wasn't that. So what was I expecting? Well, in the early to mid 2010s, as YouTube was coming up and Let's Players along with it, there was a subcategory of games coming out that I was distantly fascinated and slightly embittered by that I called YouTube games. You're very much welcome to disagree with my picks, because YouTube game is an arbitrary designation and totally separate from a game's mechanical or narrative genre. This was stuff like Minecraft, Happy Wheels, Octodad, Amnesia, Five Nights at Freddy's, QWOP, Getting Over It, Slender, Surgeon Simulator, Goat Simulator, and so on. And I'm going to argue that Sonic 06 was an accidental, prototypical YouTube game. Despite my bitterness, I was so intrigued by what these titles represented. YouTube was now a cultural force, games were being made with it in mind. So when I saw this video, I immediately decided in my head it would analyze the qualities that drew gaming YouTubers to them. Commonalities in features and execution, how they function, and at times how they fail. It even covers a transparent and less popular attempt at a YouTube game with the rather wry I Am Bread. Why this video disappointed me is that it was instead a quickfire summation of each game's content, with only a passing glance at what qualities made them YouTube games, with any connecting thread or larger point of the video coming across as entirely incidental. I was let down because it's a video I'd wanted to see that I felt ill-equipped to make myself, but the one example I found didn't realise the potential they had with this topic. So now, I'm going to use the familiar monocular lens of Sonic to take a stab at it myself and hopefully incite someone more insightful than me into having a crack at it themselves. Besides anything else, I think I've found an original angle to tackle this beaten blue game from. I'm not going to analyse it as a bad video game, but as the perfect video platform, a YouTube game, and go over what I feel were the qualities that made up this weird and eclectic subgenre and how it stands from that angle. A YouTube game doesn't need to excel in all of the following qualities to take off, some can be mutually exclusive depending on the title, and to state the obvious, you can cover any game on YouTube. These are just the aspects that make them particularly ripe picks for a content creation audience. Also, I know the term nowadays is more likely stream bait, but the principles are the same, and in internet terms I'm geriatric. Nowadays a YouTube game is for an essayist to have an existential crisis over, and I'm good. I'm doing important work here, inventing new ways to evaluate Sonic 06. The first quality we've already tackled on the way here, popularity. Popularity is self-perpetuating. Unlike the game in question, it generates its own momentum. People have heard of Sonic 06, so people will search for Sonic 06. So others will make videos about 06 to fill those search results. The cultural prominence of a game can either make people tired of it, or else add to its allure. People await their favourite gaming geezer finally tackling the big one. Many of the AVGN's most popular episodes are over a decade old with few outliers. His first of 2 episodes on 06 make it an oddity twice over. The video even acknowledges that this game is out of his era. Such is its infamy that people will bend to discuss it, unable to escape its pull. Something I find especially amusing is there was a joke made years before featuring an elderly AVGN playing a Wii game released a month after 06. The future is now, and the AVGN hasn't aged quite as badly as this gag. Sonic 06 is also a perfect blend of the next 2 qualities, spontaneity and reactability. I'm putting these 2 together as they're the ability for a game to create strong, immediate reactions, but the difference is the how and the intent. Spontaneity is a trait typically exemplified by glitches, unpredictable behaviour, and physics-based movement systems. These serve to keep a YouTube game dynamic and exciting. As I said, maybe you haven't seen every way Sonic 06 can fall apart. Hey, this next video might show a couple new ones, and so might the next. This was the draw of titles like Octodad, Surgeon Simulator, and especially Goat Simulator, where the developers promised that anything short of a game-breaking glitch wouldn't be patched out. This was, I apologise, I hate that my unconscious mind spat this out at me, gentrified jank. Jank not born of ambition exceeding grasp, but marketable randomness. This unpredictability can be reassuring for a content creator, because it means no matter how many videos are made on the same game, yours could be fresh anyway. Its mere existence is a promise of novelty. "You won't believe what happens next" is one of the most common and ridiculed forms of clickbait for a reason. We like surprise, but because we're bizarre and oxymoronic creatures, we like reliable surprise. Which brings me to the other side of the coin, reactability. It's more the domain of horror titles like Amnesia, Slender, and Five Nights at Freddy's. It's the set-in-stone events and modifiers which create reproducible reactions, i.e. jump scares and extreme difficulty. A Let's Player serves as a divider for the audience, who may have already played or seen the game and in some way want to experience it fresh, or else they're more sensitive to the subject matter and prefer someone to act as a buffer between them and the scares. Sonic 06 similarly horrified many. Its story beats are perfect reaction fodder. The game essentially does half the work for the content creator. And yes, joking aside, games of unintentional poor quality also fall here with janky set pieces, awkward objectives, and moments of bathos. There's a long-gone article on Giant Bomb that called Sonic 06 the perfectly paced bad game, and that stuck with me. It's so brilliant a way to put it. There are crazy swerves so close together that you're never far from something to be confused or amused about. It's always hitting you with something new, and it doesn't pull its punches, whether that be absurd mechanical mix-ups or more anthropomorphic melodrama than a production of Othello at a furry convention. Another angle to reactability is extreme difficulty.
Motherfucker!
We like to see passionate people, and what's more passionate than pure anger?
Stop and wait for it to go.
This is the domain of hard or awkwardly controlling games like I Wanna Be the Guy or QWOP. Many people don't want to suffer the extreme difficulty, but do wish to hear the agonized wails of those who will. You don't have to get over it with Bennett Foddy, because you can watch whoever you want do it for you. A good while ago, I took part in a Sonic race between me and some mates. One thing I learned is that while I've spent my whole life thinking Sonic is easy, he's actually kinda tricksy if you haven't grown up with him. There was a gulf in difference between those who played the series as kids and those who didn't. A gap I'm willing to bet wouldn't be half as wide if we played Mario instead. Sonic demands an atypical approach to platforming that, if learned while young, feels so intuitive it's hard to describe. This learning curve almost substitutes for that difficulty. People try Sonic, find he controls weird, and would rather watch someone else come to grips with it. Sonic 06 can be a pretty hard game thanks to said controls, and wonky physics, and glitches, and level design. Okay, there's a whole lot going against it here. Deaths are often arbitrary and unfair, rage-inducing, feeding back into spontaneity. And because few are going to want to bridge that gap, they would sooner take anyone else's word that yes, it truly is that awkward. In this way, the YouTube game insulates itself from a general, non-content creation audience and drives people to videos to bypass that barrier. For many, the actual game of Sonic 06 only exists through a third party, who get total non-control over what people see of it. Bad for sales of the actual video game, a boon for the video maker. Spontaneity and reactability are far from exclusive, and over time more games have benefited from finding ways to balance them. Slender and the Endless SCP games may have set the stage, but their scares are more set, a one-and-done deal. More recently, we've seen titles like Lethal Company, Phasmophobia, and the delightfully on-the-nose content warning evolve by expertly marrying the two. Each run has many of the same spooks, but in unpredictable configurations. Their proc-gen elements and gameplay loops not only keep the frights fresh for longer, the objectives push the player into pursuing greater peril for greater payoff, which not only works in a conventional gameplay framework, but is a sort of meta-reward for a content creator, as it angles them towards the scares their audience wants them to experience. Alongside this, their more sandboxy styles offer more room for comedy, which not only makes them more palatable for the easily frightened, but expands the emotions these games can support as content. SCP and Slender just fall apart if you as a content creator cannot act scared. These games will withstand that, however, as they have a much greater emotional room to work with. If you laugh at FNAF, it's not working. Try the same with Phasmophobia, and it's going to shift gears to make sure it gets the last laugh. By the way, yes, talking about games like this is making me feel like a soulless suit, but it's alright, we'll get through it. Next up, an attribute my channel does not embody, approachability. How easily does a game communicate itself to an audience? Fez gained its fame because its gimmick could be instantly communicated through a GIF, though I suppose that was more of a Twitter game. A Twitter game from an ex-dev. It means new viewers can get in sooner and less will fall off. It saves laborious explanations from the content creator. The easier to compress data is, the easier it travels. The easier something is to understand, the broader its appeal. As I said, you can cover anything on YouTube, but channels that tend to play stuff like Paradox strategy games or Dwarf Fortress tend to specialize into said titles and attract a thinner but more focused audience. This is an anecdotal observation and may well change with time, but as of this recording, Lethal Company is outperforming Abiotic Factor on YouTube and Twitch despite the latter's current newness. In the abstract, the two offer very similar viewing experiences. However, Abiotic has a lot of friction, which is great for it as a game, but less so as content. The presence of an overarching narrative with progression makes it less inviting for new viewers to just hop into. And on the gameplay front, its slower pace and far greater mechanical depth puts a mental load on both the streamer and audience. It takes a lot more starting knowledge to get something out of the experience in a way that more popular and cyclically structured games don't. This is an area where 06 would be middling if its reputation didn't precede it. It's a tough platformer containing a story with a lot of moving pieces, where you get more out of it by knowing more about the surrounding series. But it has enough individually funny moments free of any larger context that can grab you and make sure you want to know more. A good YouTube game can get its hooks in, but a great YouTube game will go deeper. I'm not coining a phrase, but pinching a penny with hookability, which is a bit of a spectrum. Surface level hookability is stuff like memes, in-jokes, common knowledge about the game that creates intrigue. Deeper hookability is the stuff that keeps people in for the long haul. It does this through things like an interesting background, story, lore, speculation, and ARGs. You can see this with games like Slender or the SCP titles, though the obvious king is Five Nights at Freddy's. The game began as a viral sensation through its surface-level approachability and hooks, its highly reactable jump scares and easy-to-understand gameplay loop, but then it constructed lore with big speculative gaps for its audience to fill in. This is shrewd marketing, a fascinating way to create word of mouth, and a means to give the games a sort of meta longevity, keeping fans engaged even when they're away from the game. While from what I understand this hasn't been conducive to a good story, or at least what may have started as a good story has had to sabotage itself to keep mysteries ongoing, it's such an intriguing case study in the now three-way relationship a series can have with its fanbase, from game to content creator to player. This deeper level hookability adds breadth and versatility to a property. To a standard Let's Player or Twitch streamer reacting to a game as it comes, these deeper aspects may not matter a ton, but they can give you more to talk about. It makes the game more flexible, broadening the number of ways it can be used. And, I just felt a pang of disgust describing a game as being used. Sonic 06 approaches deeper hookability, but trends to the shallower end. It has a bunch of moments which eclipse the wider game. The kiss, the kick, the quick YouTube click. These snapshots drive people to seek out reactions and channel hop, but it doesn't keep people in. 06's deeper end does offer decent range for video makers. It obviously has a lot to talk about in terms of gameplay, its story, both literal narrative and developmental. And obviously enough, the sheer amount it's been talked about is a talking point. Its fame is famous. But this is not deep hookability for our terms. It's not something that drives engagement in the same way horror mascot bullshit does, where the audience, content creator or not, is driven to participate in speculation, to make up and seek out an endless well of opinions. 06's deeper aspects are definitive and can be scoped out. While they are going to drive someone to expand their knowledge of the title, there's only so far they can go. Which brings us to the next quality where 06 is once again a little weaker: longevity. Sonic 06, unlike Forces, is a finite game. While you can lounge around in the hubs hoping for content to come forth, it won't. It waits for you to come to it, and then once it's done, you're closer to an inevitable conclusion. Longevity primarily belongs to multiplayer games, live service titles, PvP shooters, and obviously battle royales, but also their parent genre, the roguelite. Yeah, let's go with that. Longevity is, in this frame, a more structured, intentional form of spontaneity. These games are story-free narrative generators because of their sandboxy, systems-driven design, which gives them an incredible possibility space. Every run will tell its own tale, and each battle is life or permadeath, so there are always stakes to be invested in. Any moment in a BR or roguelite can turn into a memorable war story which keeps a viewer hooked. In shooters and battle royales, we also get skill mastery, watching a pro ply his trade in a competitive environment, while roguelites allow a player to steadily come to grips with a game. A good roguelite can and has carried LPers and now streamers for thousands of hours of content. But the key reason why longevity is desirable to YouTube games is reliability. I personally find the idea soul-draining. I like to cover games one and done and seek out unique, fresh, and obscure experiences so I don't get bored. But if you have to pump out content consistently, it must be comforting to have something dependable. Some people enjoy familiarity. For some, there is innate comfort in things not changing. It also allows you to build a brand around your game of choice and have a means to select the community around you. Though chasing longevity has had negative consequences, to say the very least. The explosion of a handful of forever games 5 to 10 years ago has had ruinous effects on some companies, as they gamble that they too can forge their own forever games. And so we've seen a good amount of content creators grow to resent this longevity, as the kinds of games they're pigeonholed into playing have become more and more tediously indistinct, all because they're chasing a trend that passed them by the very moment the very first forever games got their forever audiences. Lastly, there's creativity. This one's an odd duck, because it is at once an aspect of longevity, but also feels distinct. Not all longevity creates creativity, but all creativity creates longevity. This is another area where 06 isn't strong. Outside of exploits and choosing alternative routes, 06 only has so much room for player expression. Your job is to get from A to B, and creativity only factors into how you do that. While there's an obvious champ here, I first need to mention Happy Wheels. With its user-generated levels, there was a symbiotic relationship between map and content creators. If you made a level that wound up getting played on a big channel, that there is attention and prestige for your work, which encourages more levels to be made, which benefits the Let's Player with more content. It was a strange, self-sustaining ecosystem. But obviously, the king here was Minecraft. In Sonic, we've got the Chaos Emeralds, the Soul Emeralds, the Time Stones. Minecraft has the 7 Search Emerald optimizations. This game dominated YouTube and made 2 kinds of creepers famous beyond belief. We know it's popular. Its survival crafting gameplay balanced a mix of spontaneity and reactability. The game was both easy to grasp mechanically and aesthetically, but hard to master. It had just the right mix of approachability, but also a difficulty and wealth of things to discover that pushed people to videos to find out about them. It developed memes and in-jokes quickly, but also had deeper stuff like Herobrine, and its gradual development process was still seen as novel for the time, and it kept people hooked long-term with update speculation, which provided more fodder for content creators. This and its absurd scope fed longevity. You could mine this game for years and still craft fresh content. Creativity's a given, but it's not just in that it was a virtual Lego set on a practically infinite plane. Beyond the standard Let's Play, you could tailor this game for any kind of content you wanted. Machinimas, building tutorials, mod showcases, challenge videos, and so on. A fascinating and bizarre recent trend I've seen is people talking about life problems over footage of really old versions of Minecraft, which is a slightly depressing and worrying development, but these are trying times. While I don't know a great deal about it and just can't bring myself to watch any, SMP as a concept does fascinate me. It feels like something younger me would have hated, but also really would have wanted in on. A mixture of Let's Play, but with the stakes of a Battle Royale or a Machinima. You get to pal around with other creators and mutually grow your profile with potentially infinite storylines, especially once the Google Doc drops. So Minecraft is the king of content, a successor in a line that feels like it started back in 06. Despite predating the platform's mainstream dominance by some time, it really isn't hard to see why it was such a hot topic of early gaming YouTube that people had to look into, whether or not they were into Sonic. And successful videos are still made about it to this day as it is continually rediscovered. So that's YouTube games. Man, that was a blast to write, and utterly painful to hear me read. God, I sounded like a soulless marketing hack going through that shit. This is not how games ought to be judged. I don't even mean my mock framework to evaluate games on their content creation coefficient. I mean the practice of making up boxes to judge games by and then slamming them for not fitting. Or conversely, as I just did, stacking the deck in such a way that I just gave 06 a pretty positive write-up. And the fucked up thing is, as much as what I just did feels off to me, nothing I said was really untrue when you get down to it. When you look at 06 through this utterly baffling lens, it has, through its technical shortcomings, provided a useful function to a great many people. It has brought more laughs and more joy than could have possibly been predicted. And before we end, I have to talk about one last quality which is unique to 06 itself, outside of the scope of YouTube games. It's completely earnest. It believes in what it's doing, and it delivers that with total sincerity, which adds a dimension not even Sonic CD could tap into. It means that mocking it has actual heft. It puts it in league with Ride to Hell. What does it say about us that we're so drawn to totally sincere failure? I mean, it says different things about different people. Besides the obvious that it's funnier and more intriguing, I think some of us take comfort in it. We get to feel reassured that someone who should have known better, who had money, resources, and the means to put them into making something, squandered an opportunity we don't have. It can even reassure us that even if we haven't made something, at least we haven't made a fool of ourselves. It's a salve for self-worth. I got into it during SA2, but people see these cartoon creatures attempting any actual loftiness, and they can't get past it. In their minds, they've been given carte blanche to say what they want because on a pure conceptual basis, the game has forfeited the right to be treated fairly. Surgeon Simulator and Octodad are in on the joke, and you're meant to laugh along with it. Bad controls and wanton weirdness are the point, and that can be amusing. But in the case of genuinely bad media, which I believe blazed the trail for these ironically bad games, being in on the bit is the difference between Birdemic 1 and 2. The first was made with complete sincerity, which is why it's so engrossing. The creator realized what people thought of the first film and decided that for the second he's going to lean in on the joke. And now no one is laughing. Being absolutely earnest adds to the mystique of a work. This is why Neil Breen is so unique. He has somehow held on to his earnest naivety where weaker men wisened up. At least I think he did. The man's kind of inscrutable. Sonic 06 is the penultimate time Sonic would style itself closer to shonen than Saturday morning cartoons until Frontiers. As we've seen, this was a really bad era for Sonic Team when it came to responding to criticism. Heroes and Shadow already demonstrated how they'll both experiment, overcorrect, and trend chase all at once. This made the critical response to 06 an absolute worst case scenario. For all Sonic had already changed, not just over this era but since the series' inception, underneath all of the gameplay gimmicks and the constant tonal tennis match has been one unshakable thing that unites these games. The sheer confidence. The feeling that no matter what they're doing, the game believes in itself and is pursuing its current goal with total sincerity, no matter how daft in hindsight. Sonic 06 and its reception put an end to that, leading to a decade and a half of personality-free, stake-blunting comedy. Another name for the modern games to come is the Meta era, because in an attempt to stop the audience from making jokes, it decided to get there first. By far the lamest way Sonic has ever been the fastest thing alive. Anyway, that's Sonic 06. In recent years, I've actually seen people come around on it. The cultural impact it's left is still felt in Sonic circles, but it's also starting to feel more distant. It's no longer this shadow which has to loom over the franchise's reputation, and like pretty much everything does once the initial rush is over and the dominant opinion no longer feels unshakable, I've seen people having fun with this game, detached from the cynicism and the need to feel in on hating it, armed with an appreciation for jank and ambitious but flawed storytelling. I'm not sure if some reverse positive irony poisoning is entirely a good thing, so time will have to tell on that. It's just that after years of pessimism, this is at least a little refreshing. We're in a weird time with this franchise. I've said 06's reputation no longer looms so large, but it feels like at this moment the entire adventure era is back in the spotlight, with Frontiers taking the risk of respecting the series and putting earnest, unashamed excitement for itself back on the menu. With the Year of Shadow, Sonic X Shadow Generations and the third Sonic movie, all eyes are cast back here. And with new generations of younger fans discovering and rediscovering adventure, it's exciting and daunting to see minds changing yet again, not tied to thought leaders who were relevant years ago. That's why this video has been so focused on the state of discussion around the games. I mean, this series has really just been an excuse to replay Sonic and use it as a lens to talk about how we treat games through a series I'm all too familiar with. But what's beautiful and terrifying, and true of all gaming videos you're going to watch, is that this can only ever be one angle of a snapshot in time. One refrain I've been seeing a lot lately when it suddenly seems like opinion has changed on a game is, well, when did everyone start liking/hating this? We're just not built to deal with the amount of people we interact with online. And I think many of us smush that big anonymous blob into a singular comprehensible organism, humanizing it as one solid entity, and feeling frustration when it's somehow inconsistent or hypocritical. Even though we should be able to grasp that really, we're just constantly dealing with a new set of strangers each and every day. Sure, minds may have changed, but it's just as likely, if not more so, that the people have. Opinions are a race, and first word is first place. But after the race is over and you're a few years removed, you're going to be dealing with people who weren't there and have no reason to care. Their passion for the game, good or bad, carried them out of the FOMO or get the clicks in period, or came about long after. And when it comes to adventure, that's where I'm at. I'm one of the people who was there day one, there through the love, there through the backlash, and has seen opinions swallowed, digested, regurgitated, and mutated over time. And this is going to keep happening. New people are going to turn up. New games are going to cause critical reevaluations of the old. And all we can ever really do is say what we feel right now. So that's the end of my era, And what an adventure it was. Sonic's clumsy middle period, and still the one I have by far the most fondness for, both for the genuine joy it brought me as a kid, and now as an adult charmed by its eccentricities. I utterly adore it. Even outside of Sonic, the 2000s was such a hilarious time of games trying to figure out what the hell they were trying to be. They hadn't truly cracked the mainstream yet, and had the funniest idea of maturity. The mascot platformer was in its dying gasps as first-person platformers and crime sandboxes became the dominant genres. This era is defined by dumb, sophomoric grit, and I love it for that. It feels like another world. And speaking of another world, there were some noteworthy spin-offs at the time. I only played the first of the Riders games, and it was too much for my kid brain. I've heard from others who did stick with it that once you get past its obtuse mechanics, you get a really meaty and interesting racer. Later entries, fearing a repeat of this, stripped out all of the unique mechanics and didn't really attract a new audience, just killed the one that actually got to grips with the first, so good going, lads. That's a story I'm a little familiar with. Sonic Rivals is truly the least fun I've ever had with a Sonic game, impressively forgettable. The most noteworthy spin-offs of this era are the storybook games, both of which are relentlessly charming and loaded with some of the best music in an already stacked series. It's kind of a shame that vocal themes were about to be killed dead as we entered the 2010s. The amazing songs featured here are screaming at the dying of the light. I mean shit, you got Seven Rings in Hand, The Palace That Was Found, Unawakening Float, It's Come to This, Night of the Wind, Through the Fire, Fight the Night, With Me, Live Life. It's a treasure trove of great vocal tracks. And I have to give Forces props for letting these start working their way back in after Unleashed was their swan song. God, talk about opinion shifting. The series seeming to work its way back to being cool means I'm starting to see Forces in a positive light as this awkward first step back towards that, and it kind of warms it up a bit for me. Still, both storybook entries are marred by bad controls. They're third-party Wii titles trying to get the most of a gimmick that had very little to offer. A nice little insight into the era's trends. These get in the way of what are decent Sonic stories where after being out of focus and a little off for Shadow and 06, he's back to the cocky but surprisingly clever and emotionally intelligent rat we know in Sonic Adventure 2. And the villain in Black Knight brings out an aspect of his character that at once makes sense, but you'd think there'd never be an angle by which it could be explored. Work is being done on a Unity port of Secret Rings, hoping to give it more standard controls, so that may be worth keeping an eye on in the future. But that aside, I miss this era, warts and all. Budgets weren't so high that crazy shit could come out on console, and Sonic, now out of the 90s he was made for, had to figure out how he could appeal to the dozens of fan bases he'd left in his wake. And for some, he would always be putting a foot wrong. And for me, that's perfect. I still don't know what I'm going to do with the Boost games, and so I'm ending this part by asking for help. I need suggestions. Now, I've already gotten a great many suggestions, but let me explain what I'm after, because what I'm looking for is arbitrary, unfair, and hard to gauge. I don't just want to play the games in a weird way, I want to play them in a weird way that contrives a topic to talk about. It can't just be a dumb, inconvenient way to go through a title. It has to lead somewhere deeper. So when you're thinking up your suggestions, think about what that may lead to. You don't have to tell me what you hope it does, but that may help. Especially if it's a subject that has to do with Sonic, how we play games, and how we treat media. I do not know how far off the modern or Boost era video will be, but it will be someday. And to everyone, thank you for waiting, thank you so much for watching. It's so nice to talk about Sonic. This is gaming. If you want to support me, please infect other people with this video. If you want to support me more directly, I have a Patreon. Everyone who donates gets thanked. Names are speeding by now. Hopefully not so fast that our main subject would try and race them. At $3 you get access to scripts and notes. Not a ton of extra materials for this one though, I'll be honest. At $5 you get access to afterthought videos where I go over any thoughts that didn't make it into the main video, and I answer any questions that I get from those in that bracket about the games. Thank you so much for watching.
Shout out to Pizza!
matter now. It didn't matter then. It still doesn't matter. It doesn't matter any day. No, Sonic runs really fast. He speeds, he gets those gold rings. Sonic, he's a hedgehog. But why is he blue? He probably dyed his quills. Doesn't matter. Now what happens? I will never give up the fight. No, yes, it matters. It doesn't matter though. Doesn't matter. Who's wrong or who is right? Yeah! Woo! Doesn't matter what happens. It doesn't matter any time of the day. At 2:30, it doesn't matter. At 4 a.m., it doesn't matter. At 5 p.m., it doesn't matter. Now what happens? I will never give up the fight. Long as the things. It doesn't matter. Who's right. Guitar solo. Everyone clap. Doesn't matter. Now what happens? I will never give up the fight. Long as in the end it doesn't matter. But it doesn't matter who is wrong or who is right. Oh yeah. Doesn't matter. Second shout out to pizza.